Hello everybody, and how are you? I do hope you're well. It's rather warm here, and there's not a lot we can do about it. It's just that time of year. It's summer, and we've just had a thunderstorm last night, and you'd think that that would make it feel nice and cool today, but it was nice and cool this morning, and now it's not. That's just the way life is. Can't change it. So you make the most of it. So you do things like get a cool cloth, which is a special bit of fabric that you get it damp, you give it a shake, and it makes everything feel nice and cool for a little while. And then when it starts to warm up again, you give it another shake and it cools down very quickly, and you put it back on your skin and it makes you feel a lot better. I discovered it a couple of years ago when we were traveling. It makes such a difference. Seriously, it does. Anyway, so we're currently reading More William by Richmal Crompton, and what have we had happen? We've had all sorts of things happen, haven't we? William even invited a burglar into the house. He made friends with him, and the chap was about to steal a bunch of stuff. And then the family discovered that he was there, and somebody else turned up and said, "That's him, that's the man who stole the stuff." And everyone thought that William was actually trying to stop the guy from running away with their things, and thought he was a hero, even though in actual fact William was trying to help the guy get out of the house, because to William he was just his new friend, who was quite exciting. Anyway, it's just one of those things. If you're new here, hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, the books my parents and my grandparents, as well as me, grew up reading, and I'd call them rough reads. I call them rough reads. I would say that they're much more like bedtime stories than audiobooks, because audiobooks are like too perfect, and that's not the way I read. I have ADHD, so I will sometimes get lost in the middle of reading a sentence. And it may take me a few minutes to actually find the right spot on the page. I will get distracted, I try not to, by various other things, thoughts that come through my mind. Sometimes they're quite interesting and I'll share them with you. Sometimes we will look something up. Often the people in chat will do that. They will look up something and give me a definition of something that I was not quite sure on, and I'm happy to read that out. But I don't generally do a lot of chatting during chapters. I chat between chapters and at the beginning and the end of our streaming session. So if you want to join in, you're most welcome to chat, but keep it family friendly, because that's the intention of these streams, is that people can sit and enjoy a story that's harmless, because in this day and age I think a few of us need harmless entertainment. What else? That's the sort of things I read. That's the characteristics of our streaming. I save the videos from when I'm doing them live. Oops, that's the downstairs door going bang because the wind's picked up. Maybe that means it's going to rain. I don't know. We'll find out soon. I save my recordings from here, and I put them over on YouTube and then put them into playlists. So if you want to listen to a whole book, you go over to my YouTube channel, and the links are down below actually. And once you're over there, look for the book that you want to listen to. And if it's something that's been completed, you will have a whole playlist there. And they go over to YouTube about 2 weeks after I've actually read them live on Twitch. Nothing more to say except for, have you got your something to drink and something to snack on and a comfortable seat? And then we'll get reading. Ready to go? Are you or not? Go on. Otherwise you have to wait till the chapter break, or take your phone with you and listen while you're off getting your drink of water and things like that. Anyway, so here we go. More William by Richmal Crompton. We have read actually the first book of the William books that she wrote, which was Just William. So More William by Richmal Crompton. We are reading chapter 5, William's Hobby. What trouble will he get into? William's usually not intending to get into trouble, but he often gets into trouble. just because he misunderstands the way people intend things, because adults say things in very confusing ways. And also because people don't understand his intentions. So we'll see what's going to happen today. William's hobby. Uncle George was William's godfather, and he was intensely interested in William's upbringing. It was an interest with which William would gladly have dispensed. Uncle George's annual visit was to William a purgatory only to be endured by a resolutely philosophic attitude of mind, and the knowledge that sooner or later it must come to an end. Uncle George had an ideal of what a boy should be, and it was a continual grief to him that William fell so short of this ideal, but he never relinquished his efforts to make William conform to it. Oh dear, we've spoken about this before when William's aunts stayed at Christmas time. Often people who don't have children of their own consider themselves to be experts about how children should be raised, taught, behave, thinking it's all to do with the parents doing their job properly. Poor parents of those children. Children have their own choices that they make. Yes, you can raise your children badly, but the reality is children also have choices that they make in terms of how they behave. And anyone who's a parent of a child that has a mind of their own will actually understand that. Anyway, enough of the philosophizing. We shall carry on reading. He never relinquished his efforts to make William conform to it. His ideal was a gentle boy of exquisite courtesy and of intellectual pursuits. Oh dear, this is not William. Such a boy he could have loved. It was hard that fate had endowed him with a godson like William. William was neither quiet nor gentle, nor courteous nor intellectual, but William was intensely human. It's quite interesting. Actually, I just realised what I was saying about people's attitudes to other people's children, especially if they don't have children themselves. The amusing aspect of all this is that the author, Richmal Crompton, as far as I can find out, didn't actually have any children of her own, but she had been a school teacher. And I think she actually had a very sharp understanding of what children are really like. Sorry, I've got something itching my eye. I don't know that it's the cat this time because I said hello to him, but I didn't get all up close and get fluff on my face or anything like that. Doesn't matter. The length of Uncle George's visit this year was beginning to reach the limits of William's patience. He was beginning to feel that sooner or later something must happen. For 5 weeks now he had reluctantly accompanied Uncle George upon his morning walk. He had, generally unsuccessfully, tried to maintain that state of absolute quiet that Uncle George's afternoon rest required. He had in the evening listened wearily to Uncle George's stories of his youth. His usual feeling of mild contempt for Uncle George was beginning to give way to one which was much stronger. "Now, William," said Uncle George at breakfast, "I'm afraid it's going to rain today, so we'll do a little work together this morning, shall we? Nothing like work, is there? Your arithmetic's a bit shaky, isn't it? We'll rub that up. We love our work, don't we?" William eyed him coldly. "I don't think I'd better get muddling up my schoolwork," he said. "I shouldn't like to be more on than the other boys next term. It wouldn't be fair to them." That's some pretty good logic there from a young lad of 11. Uncle George rubbed his hands. "That feeling does you credit, my boy," he said. "But if we go over some of the old work, no harm can be done. History now. There's nothing like history, is there?" William agreed quite heartily that there wasn't. Not his favourite subject. "We'll do some history then," said Uncle George briskly. "The lives of the great. Most inspiring. Better than those terrible things you used to waste your time on, eh?" The terrible things had included a trumpet, a beloved motor hooter, that's the horn on a motor car, I think, the ooga ones where they go ooga, and by squeezing the rubber ball on the end of the horn part. And an ingenious instrument very dear to William's soul that reproduced most realistically the sound of two cats fighting. These, at Uncle George's request, had been confiscated by William's father. Uncle George had not considered them educational. They also disturbed his afternoon rest. Uncle George settled himself and William down for a nice quiet morning in the library. William, looking round for escape, found none. The outside world was wholly uninviting. The rain came down in torrents. Moreover, the 5 preceding weeks had broken William's spirits. He realised the impossibility of evading Uncle George. His own family were not unsympathetic. They suffered from him considerably during the rest of the year and were not sorry to see him absorbed completely by Uncle George's conscientious zeal. So Uncle George is keeping William out of his family's way. So Uncle George seated himself slowly and ponderously in an armchair by the fire. "When I was a boy, William," he began, leaning back and joining the tips of his fingers together, "I loved my studies. I'm sure you love your studies, don't you? Which do you love most?" "Me," said William. "I like shooting and playing Red Injuns." Yes, said Uncle George impatiently, "but those aren't studies, William. You must aim at being gentle." "It's not much good being gentle when you're playing Red Injuns," said William stoutly. "A gentle Red Injun wouldn't get much done." "Ah, but why play Red Indians?" said Uncle George. "A nasty, rough game. No, we'll talk about history. You must mould your character upon that of the great heroes, William." I'm thinking that quite possibly we have the potential for things to go not quite the way Uncle George expects, because William is going to heed what Uncle George says, and it's going to turn out slightly differently. She's quite a sharp observer of human nature, is Richmal Crompton. I'll carry on. You must mould your character upon that of the great heroes, William. You must be a Clive, a Napoleon, a Wolfe. These are obviously famous people in England, in British history. Napoleon was actually an opponent, though. Anyway, "I've often been a wolf," said William. "That game's nearly as good as Red Injuns. And bears is a good game too. We might have bears here," he went on, brightening. "Just you and me. Would you sooner be a bear or hunter?" "I'd sooner be hunter," he hinted gently. "You misunderstand," said Uncle George. "I mean Wolfe the man. Wolfe the hero." Okay, if you're listening at the moment, you're most welcome to look up this famous chap called Wolfe in British history, Wolfe, and find out who he was and what he did, because I don't think that William's going to tell us. Anyway, William, who had little patience with heroes who came within the school curriculum, relapsed into gloom. "What lessons do we learn from such names, my boy?" went on Uncle George. William was on the floor behind Uncle George's chair, endeavouring to turn a somersault in a very restricted space. "History lessons and dates and things," he said shortly, "and the things they expect you to remember," he added with disgust. No, said Uncle George, and I'm pretty sure we've got a picture. There you go. There's Uncle George and William in the small space behind Uncle George's chair, trying to turn a somersault. I knew them as cartwheels. They called them somersaults. Whatever, doesn't matter. Not a lot of room there, and Uncle George can't see him. Carrying on. No, said Uncle George, but the fire was hot and his chair was uncomfortable and his educational zeal was dying away. To endure the buffets of fate with equanimity, to smile at misfortune, to endure whatever comes, and so on. he stopped suddenly. William had managed the somersault, but it had somehow brought his feet into collision with Uncle George's neck. Uncle George sleepily shifted his position. "Boisterous, boisterous," he murmured disapprovingly. "You should combine the gentleness of a Moore with the courage of a Wellington, William." Moore being a surname, not a nationality, Moore. William now perceived that Uncle George's eyelids were drooping slowly, and William's sudden statuesque calm would have surprised many of his instructors. The silence and the warmth of the room had their effect. In less than 3 minutes, Uncle George was dead to the world around him. William's form relaxed. Then he crept up to look closely at the face of his enemy. He decided that he disliked it intensely. Something must be done at once. He looked round the room. There were not many weapons handy. Only his mother's workbox stood on a chair by the window, and on it a pile of socks belonging to Robert, William's elder brother. Beneath either arm of his chair, one of Uncle George's coat tails protruded. William soon departed on his way, rejoicing. Remember, I told you I get lost in the middle of a sentence. Sorry, ADHD. William soon departed on his way rejoicing, while on to one of Uncle George's coat tails was firmly stitched a bright blue sock, and on to the other a brilliant orange one. Robert's taste in socks was decidedly loud. William felt almost happy. The rain had stopped, and he spent the morning with some of his friends whom he met in the road. They went bear hunting in the wood, and though no bears were found, still their disappointment was considerably allayed by the fact that one of them saw a mouse and another one distinctly smelt a rabbit. William returned to lunch whistling to himself, and had the intense satisfaction of seeing Uncle George enter the dining room, obviously roused from his slumbers by the luncheon bell, and obviously quite unaware of the blue and orange socks that still adorned his person. "Curious," he ejaculated as Ethel, William's grown-up sister, pointed out the blue sock to him. "Most curious." William departed discreetly, muttering something about "better tidy up a bit," which drew from his sister expressions of surprise and solicitous questions as to his state of health. William wasn't inclined normally to go and wash up a bit. Oh, goodness. Sorry, just waiting for this to stop pausing, and then I shall carry on. I'm thinking we're probably going to have maybe some dropped frames. I hope not. You didn't miss any story then. As soon as that actually started to pause, I paused as well, but I kept moving so I could see if it was happening, you know, the streaming. We shall carry on. So, his sister, Ethel, gave expressions of surprise and solicitous questions as to his state of health, because William didn't normally go off and tidy up a bit unless he was forced to. Most curious again, said Uncle George, who had now discovered the orange sock. When William returned, all excitement was over, and Uncle George was consuming roast beef with energy. I'd say he has a fairly healthy appetite. "Ah, William," he said, "we must complete the history lesson soon. Nothing like history, nothing like history, nothing like history. Teaches us to endure the buffets of fate with equanimity and to smile at misfortune. Then we must do some geography." William groaned. "Most fascinating study. Rivers, mountains, cities, etc. Most improving." The morning should be devoted to intellectual work at your age, William, and the afternoon to the quiet pursuit of some improving hobby. You would then find the true joy of life. To judge from William's countenance, he did not wholly agree, but he made no objection. He had learnt that objection was useless, and against Uncle George's eloquence, silence was his only weapon. After lunch, Uncle George followed his usual custom and retired to rest. William went to the shed in the back garden and continued the erection of a rabbit hutch that he had begun a few days before. He hoped that if he made a hutch, Providence would supply a rabbit. He whistled blithely as he knocked nails in at random. "William, you mustn't do that now." He turned a stern gaze on his mother. "Why not?" "Uncle George is resting." With a crushing glance at her, he strolled away from the shed. Someone had left the lawn-mower in the middle of the lawn. With one of his rare impulses of pure virtue, he determined to be useful. Also, he rather liked mowing the grass. This is one of those push mowers where it has 2 wheels, one at each end, and a series of blades that go round between the 2 wheels, and you push it and pull it, and those blades, as they go round, slice the grass as they cross the bar. So there you go. That's how people used to mow their lawns. Also, he rather liked mowing the grass. "William, don't do that now," called his sister from the window. "Uncle George is resting." It's not as noisy as a motor mower, but they do make a bit of noise. He deliberately drove the mowing machine into the middle of a garden bed and left it there. He was beginning to feel desperate. Then, "What can I do?" he said bitterly to Ethel, who was still at the window. "You'd better find some quiet, improving hobby," she said unkindly as she went away. It is a proof of the utterly broken state of William's spirit that he did actually begin to think of hobbies, but none of those that occurred to him interested him. Stamp collecting, pressed flowers, crest collecting. Crest collecting, I think, is where you take rubbings of heraldic emblems, like heraldic crests and stuff, because in certain types of place in a certain era, they use those as markings on different things like gate posts and letter boxes and tombstones, a bit like brass rubbings in a church on the tombstones, where people take a recording by rubbing a candle, a wax crayon over a large piece of paper. Did you ever do that with coins, to make coins for playing games with? You take a piece of paper, we used to use lunch wrap, not waxed one, but just plain one, and a coloured crayon, and you hold the coin with the paper over it so the paper won't move and the coin won't move, and then you rub the crayon backwards and forwards across it, and you get a picture of the coin because of all the raised bumps and the bits that aren't raised, and then you cut that out and you pretended those were coins when you were playing. Brass rubbing is something similar, but you do it on a tombstone that's in a cemetery or in the floor of a church, in some of the old churches in England. And sometimes they will have just text, sometimes they'll have pictures like wreaths and things like that, helmets from armour, that sort of picture, but done in a very, very shallow cut in the stone or in the brass work that was there. And it was a way of people had of recording something that they'd gone and had a look at. Some people actually deliberately go to different churches and do that as a thing to collect, like he referenced stamp collecting. And so I would say that crest collecting is a similar thing again, but done with a crest, which is like a shield emblem with the markings on it, and then the other bits and pieces, the ornamentation on top, used in heraldry. Maybe. If it's not, you can look it up and write it down somewhere so we can share that information online here, or in Discord even, or in the comments on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. That's good too. Anyway, so they all made him go, ugh. Not his idea of something interesting. He set off down the road, his hands in his pockets and his brows drawn into a stern frown. He amused himself by imagining Uncle George in various predicaments, lost on a desert island, captured by pirates, or carried off by an eagle. Then something in the window of a house he passed caught his eye, and he stopped suddenly. It was a stuffed bird under a glass case, like a glass dome type thing. Now that was something like a hobby, stuffing dead animals. He wouldn't mind having that for a hobby, and it was quiet. It's called taxidermy. He could do it while Uncle George was resting, and it must be quite easy. The first thing to do, of course, was to find a dead animal. Any old thing would do to begin on. A dead cat or a dog. He could do bigger ones like bears and lions later on. He spent nearly an hour in a fruitless search for a dead cat or dog. And he searched the ditches on both sides of the road and several gardens because sometimes animals get hit by a passing vehicle and it will kill them, and so therefore they lie dead in the ditch. And so that's what he's thinking of, is roadkill. Yeah. Did I tell you that the older stories are not necessarily as have the same sensitivities as modern ones? There you go. Just think of it as being history lessons. He searched the ditches on both sides of the road and several gardens. He began to have a distinct sense of grievance against the race of cats and dogs in general for not dying in his vicinity. At the end of the hour, he found a small dead frog. It was very dry and shriveled, but it was certainly a dead frog and would do to begin on. He took it home in his pocket. He wondered what they did first in stuffing dead animals. He'd heard something about tannin them. Tanning? Tannin. But what was tannin, and how did one get it? Then he remembered suddenly having heard Ethel talk about the tannin in tea. So that was all right. The first thing to do was to get some tea. He went to the drawing room. It was empty, but upon the table near the fire was a tea tray and 2 cups. Evidently his mother and sister had just had tea there. He put the frog at the bottom of a cup and carefully filled the cup with tea from the teapot. Then he left it to soak and went out into the garden. Rather gross to us, but it makes a lot of sense to a lad of 11 years old who only has some of the information. A few minutes later, William's mother entered the drawing room. Uncle George had finished resting and was standing by the mantelpiece with a cup in his hand. "I see you poured out my tea for me," he said, "but rather a curious taste. Doubtless you boil the milk now. Safer, of course, much safer, but it imparts a curious flavour." He took another sip. "But I didn't pour out your tea," began Mrs. Brown. "Here." Excuse me. Nothing to do with the story. I just need to mute my microphone for a minute. I've got something caught in the back of my throat. Sorry. Just something caught at the back of my throat. It actually wasn't anything to do with this part of the story. "But I didn't pour out your tea," began Mrs. Brown. Here William entered. He looked quickly at the table. "Who's meddling with my frog?" he said angrily. "It's my hobby and I'm stuffing frogs, and someone's been and took my frog. I left it on the table." "On the table?" said his mother. "Yes, in a cup of tea, getting tannin, you know, for stuffing. I put 'em in tannin first. Uncle George grew pale. In frozen silence, he put a spoon into his cup and investigated the contents. In still more frozen silence, Mrs. Brown and William watched. That moment held all the cumulative horror of a Greek tragedy. Then Uncle George put down his cup. Here you go. Sorry, I forgot about the picture. Then Uncle George put down his cup and went silently from the room. On his face was the expression of one who is going to look up the first train home. Fate had sent him a buffet he could not endure with equanimity, a misfortune at which he could not smile, and fate had avenged William for much. Whoops, sorry there. Uncle George definitely enjoys his meals. Poor William's mother, rather put upon. All the relatives want to stay with them at different times. I'm guessing it's because it's a free holiday and the relatives who come and stay are not having to worry about doing meals and stuff for themselves, which they would be doing at home. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And that was the end of that chapter. So I am just getting this set up for the next one, and I'm going to have a drink of water. You should too. Go on. And if you haven't got your drink of water handy, or whatever it is you're drinking today, and I won't ask, go and get one now. Good idea. Off you go. I'll wait. While I'm having my water, I won't be reading. And I've got my nectarine. Are you ready? Comfortable? Then we'll continue. More William by Richmal Crompton, Chapter 6, The Rivals. The last one was William's hobby. This one is the rivals. What trouble will we have here? William was aware of a vague feeling of apprehension when he heard that Joan Clive, the little girl who lived next door, was having a strange cousin to stay for 3 weeks. I'm guessing it's a little bit like where we live. We live out in the country. We happen to be near a beach. It's not a fabulous beach. It's not exciting. But we're out in the country. And so friends and relations from in the city used to come and expect to spend time with us, to have a holiday with us, forgetting that we might want a holiday too. And so I'm guessing that that's part of it, as I was saying before at the end of the previous chapter about Uncle George staying with them. Sorry, my nose stud has turned around and it's tickling the inside of my nose. As I was saying about Uncle George coming and staying with them, and before that, at Christmas time, they'd had 3 aunts. And I'm guessing that they live in a village that is out of the city a little bit, and so therefore people think, oh, that's a nice place to go and stay for a holiday. And because it's relations, they don't expect to pay anything, do they? Not very nice. Anyway, so obviously it happens to other people in their area too, like Joan Clive, who lives next door. So we shall carry on. William was aware of a vague feeling of apprehension when he heard that Joan Clive, the little girl who lived next door, was having a strange cousin to stay for 3 weeks. All his life, William had accepted Joan's adoration and homage with condescending indifference. But he did not like to imagine a possible rival. "What's he coming for?" he demanded with an ungracious scowl, perched uncomfortably and dangerously on the high wall that separated the 2 gardens, and glaring down at Joan. "What's he coming for, anyway?" "'Cause mother's invited him," said Joan, simply, with a shake of her golden curls. "He's called Cuthbert. She says he's a sweet little boy." "Sweet," echoed William, with a tone of exaggerated horror. "Ugh." "Well," said Joan, with the smallest note of indignation in her voice, "you needn't play with him if you don't like." "Me? Play? With him? Scowled William, as if he could not believe his ears. I'm not like to go playing with a kid like what he'll be. Joan raised aggrieved blue eyes. You're a horrid boy sometimes, William, she said. Anyway, I shall have him to play with soon. It was the first time he had received anything but admiration from her. He scowled speechlessly. Cuthbert arrived the next morning. William was restless and ill at ease, and several times climbed the ladder for a glimpse of the guest. That's the ladder that's on his side of the garden wall. But all he could see was the garden inhabited only by a cat and a gardener. He amused himself by throwing stones at the cat till he hit the gardener by mistake, and then fled precipitously before a storm of abuse. William and the gardener were enemies of very long standing. After dinner he went out again into the garden and stood gazing through a chink in the wall. Cuthbert was in the garden. Though as old and tall as William, he was dressed in an embroidered tunic, very short knickers, that's shorts, they weren't called shorts back then, and white socks. Over his blue eyes his curls were brushed up into a golden halo. He was a picturesque child. What shall we do? Joan was saying. Would you like to play hide and seek? No, let's not play at rough games, said Cuthbert. With a wild spasm of joy, William realised that his enemy lisped. It is always well to have a handle against one's enemies. What shall we do then? Said Joan, somewhat wearily. Let's sit down and I'll tell you fairy stories, said Cuthbert. A loud snort from inside the wall just by his ear startled him, and he clutched Joan's arm. What's that? He said. There were sounds of clambering feet on the other side of the wall. Then William's grimy countenance appeared. I don't think that the author thinks that everyone with a lisp actually is a nuisance. I think it's just that she's drawing a caricature for us, okay? So please don't be offended if you have a lisp. She's not against you. She's just drawing a comic depiction of something that she thinks a little 11-year-old boy is going to have a hard time with. William's grimy countenance appeared. Hello, Joan, he said, ignoring the stranger. Joan's eyes brightened. Come and play with us, William, she begged. We don't want dirty little boys, murmured Cuthbert fastidiously. William could not, with justice, have objected to the epithet. He had spent the last half hour climbing onto the rafters of the disused coach house, and dust and cobwebs adorned his face and hair. He's always like that, explained Joan carelessly. By this time William had thought of a suitable rejoinder. All right, he jeered. Don't look at me then. Go on telling fairy stories. Cuthbert flushed angrily. You're a nasty, rude little boy, he said. I'll tell my mother. Thus war was declared. He came to tea the next day. Not all William's pleadings could persuade his mother to cancel the invitation. Well, said William darkly, wait till you've seen him, that's all. Wait till you've heard him speaking. He can't talk even. He can't play. He tells fairy stories. He doesn't like dirt. He's got long hair and a funny long coat. He's awful, I tell you. I don't want to have him to tea. I don't want to be washed and all just because he's coming to tea. But as usual, William's eloquence availed nothing. Several people came to tea that afternoon, and there was a sudden silence when Mrs. Clive, Joan, and Cuthbert entered. Cuthbert was in a white silk tunic, embroidered with blue. He wore white shoes and white silk socks. His golden curls shone. He looked angelic. Oh, the darling! Isn't he adorable? What a picture! Come here, sweetheart. Cuthbert was quite used to this sort of thing. They were more delighted than ever with him when they discovered his lisp. His manners were perfect. He raised his face with a charming smile to be kissed, then sat down on the sofa between Joan and Mrs. Clive, swinging long bare legs. William, sitting an unwilliam victim on a small chair in a corner of the room, brushed and washed till he shone again, was conscious of a feeling of fury quite apart from the usual sense of outrage that he always felt on such an occasion. It was bad enough to be washed till the soap went into his eyes and down his ears despite all his protests. It was bad enough to have had his hair brushed till his head smarted. Yeah, hairbrushes were quite harsh in the old days. It was bad enough to be hustled out of his comfortable jersey into his Eton suit, which he loathed, but to see Joan, his Joan, sitting next to the strange dressed-up, lisping boy, smiling and talking to him, that was almost more than he could bear with calmness. Previously, as has been said, he had received Joan's adoration with coldness, but previously there had been no rival. "William," said his mother, "take Joan and Cuthbert and show them your engine and books and things. Remember you're the host, dear," she murmured as he passed. "Try to make them happy." He turned upon her a glance that would have made a stronger woman quail. Silently he led them up to his playroom. "There's my engine and my books. You can play with them," he said coldly to Cuthbert. "Let's go and play in the garden, you and me, Joan." But Joan shook her head. "I don't suppose they'd care to go out. They'd care to go out without me," said Cuthbert airily. "I'll go with you. This boy can stay here, can play here if he likes." Sorry, it's written with the lisps, and I'm trying to actually figure out what the vowel sounds are meant to be to go with it, because they're not normal words. And William, artist in vituperation as he was, could think of no response. He followed them into the garden, and there came upon him a wild determination to show his superiority. "You can't climb that tree," he began. "I can," said Cuthbert sweetly. "Well, climb it then," he said grimly. "No, I don't want to get my things all messed." "I can climb it, but you can't." "He can't climb it, Joan. He's trying to pretend he can climb it when he can't. He knows I can climb it, but I don't want to get my things messed." Joan smiled admiringly at Cuthbert. "I'll show you," said William desperately. "I'll just show you." He showed them. He climbed till the tree tops swayed with his weight, then descended, hot and triumphant. The tree was covered with green lichen, a great part of which had deposited itself upon William's suit. His efforts had also twisted his collar round till its stud was beneath his ear. Remember, I've talked about the fact that the collars were often a separate piece of clothing that was put on. His heated countenance beamed with pride. For a moment Cuthbert was nonplussed. Then he said scornfully, "Don't he look a fright, Joan?" Joan giggled, but William was wholly engrossed in his self-imposed task of showing them. He led them to the bottom of the garden, where a small stream, now almost dry, disappeared into a narrow tunnel to flow under the road and reappear in the field at the other side. "You can't crawl through that," challenged William. "You can't do it. I've done it. Done it often. I bet you can't. I bet you can't get halfway. Well, do it then," jeered Cuthbert. William, on all fours, disappeared into the mud and slime of the small round aperture. Joan clasped her hands, and even Cuthbert was secretly impressed. They stood in silence. At intervals, William's muffled voice came from the tunnel. "It's jolly muddy too, I can tell you." "I've caught a frog. I say, I've caught a frog." "Crumbs, it's got away." "It's nearly quicksands here." "If I tried, I could nearly drown here." At last, through the hedge, they saw him emerge in the field across the road. He swaggered across to them, aglow with his own heroism. As he entered the gate, he was rewarded by the old light of adoration in Joan's blue eyes. But on full sight of him, it quickly turned to consternation. His appearance was beyond description. There was a malicious smile on Cuthbert's face. "Do something else," he urged him. Go on, do something else." "Oh, William," said Joan anxiously, "you'd better not." But the gods had sent madness to William. He was drunk with the sense of his own prowess. He was regardless of consequences. He pointed to a little window high up in the coal house. That little window up there. See, he's looking rather dirty. His collar is awry. That's meant to be the front of it, and it's under his ear. And this is Cuthbert. He pointed to a little window high up in the coal house. "I can climb up and slide down the coal inside. That's what I can do. There's nothing I can't do. All right," urged Cuthbert. "If you can do that, do it, and I'll believe you can do anything." For Cuthbert, with unholy glee, foresaw William's undoing. "Oh, William," pleaded Joan, "I know you're brave, but don't." But William was already doing it. They saw his disappearance into the little window. They heard plainly his descent down the coal heap inside. And in less than a minute he appeared in the doorway. He was almost unrecognisable. Coal dust adhered freely to the moist consistency of the mud and lichen already clinging to his suit, as well as to his hair and face. His collar had been almost torn away from its stud. William himself was smiling proudly, utterly unconscious of his appearance. Joan was plainly wavering between horror and admiration. Then the moment for which Cuthbert had long arrived. "Children, come in now." Cuthbert, clean and dainty, entered the drawing-room first and pointed an accusing finger at the strange figure which followed. "He's been climbing trees and crawling in the mud and rolling down the coals. He's a nasty, rough boy." A wild babble arose as William entered. "William, you dreadful boy! Joan, come right away from him. Come over here. What will your father say? William, my carpet!" For the greater part of the stream's bed still clung to William's boots. Doggedly, William defended himself. "I was showing him how to do things. I was being a host. I was trying to make him happy. William, don't stand there talking. Go straight upstairs to the bathroom." And it was the end of the first battle, and undoubtedly William had lost. Yet William had caught sight of the smile on Cuthbert's face, and William had decided that that smile was something to be avenged. But fate did not favour him. Indeed, fate seemed to do the reverse. The idea of a children's play did not emanate from William's mother or Joan's. They were both free from guilt in that respect. It emanated from Mrs. de Vere Carter. We've experienced her before. She seems to think she knows what children like. Oh dear. Mrs. de Vere Carter was a neighbour with a genius for organisation. There were few things she did not organise till their every other aspect or aim was lost, but that of organisation. She also had what amounted practically to a disease for getting up things. It was a phrase that was used at the time. We'll get up this, as in we will organise and put this on, like have it as an event. She got up plays and bazaars and pageants and concerts. There were, in fact, few things that she did not get up. It was the sight of Joan and Cuthbert walking together down the road, the sun shining on their golden curls, that had inspired her with the idea of getting up a children's play, and Joan must be the princess, and little Cuthbert the prince. Mrs. de Vere Carter was to write the play herself. At first she decided on Cinderella. Unfortunately, there was a dearth of little girls in the neighbourhood, and therefore it was decided at a meeting composed of Mrs. de Vere Carter, Mrs. Clive, Mrs. Brown, that's William's mother, and Ethel, William's sister, that William could easily be dressed up to represent one of the ugly sisters. It was, however, decided at a later meeting, consisting of William and his mother and sister, that William would not take the part. It was William who came to this decision. He was adamant against both threats and entreaties. Without cherishing any delusions about his personal appearance, he firmly declined to play the part of the ugly sister. They took the news with deep apologies to Mrs. de Vere Carter, who was already in the middle of the first act. Her already low opinion of William sank to 0. Their next choice was Little Red Riding Hood, and William was lured by glowing pictures of a realistic costume into consenting to take the part of the wolf. Every day he had to be dragged by some elder and responsible member of his family to a rehearsal. His hatred of Cuthbert was only equalled by his hatred of Mrs. de Vere Carter. "He acts so unnaturally," moaned Mrs. de Vere Carter. "Try really to think you're a wolf, darling. Put some spirit into it. Be animated." William scowled at her and once more muttered monotonously his opening lines. "A wolf am I, a wolf on mischief bent. To eat this little maid is my intent." "Take a breath after bent, darling. Now say it again." William complied, introducing, this time, a loud and audible gasp to represent the breath, because she had said he had to. Mrs. de Vere Carter sighed. "Now, Cuthbert, darling, draw your little sword and put your arm around Joan. That's right." Cuthbert obeyed, and his clear voice rose in a high, chanting monotone. "Avaunt! Begone, you wicked wolf, away! This gentle maid shall never be your prey." "That's beautiful, darling. Now, William, slink away, darling. Don't stand staring at Cuthbert like that. Slink away, I'll show you. Watch me slink away." Mrs. de Vere Carter slunk away realistically, and the sight of it brought momentary delight to William's weary soul. Otherwise, the rehearsals were not far removed from torture to him. The thought of being a wolf had at first attracted him, but actually a wolf character who had to repeat Mrs. de Vere Carter's meaningless couplets and be worsted at every turn by the smiling Cuthbert, who was forced to watch from behind the scenes the fond embraces of Cuthbert and Joan, galled his proud spirit unspeakably. Moreover, Cuthbert monopolised her both before and after the rehearsals. "Come away, Joan, he's probably all over coal dust and all of a mess." The continued presence of unsympathetic elders prevented his proper avenging of such insults. The day of the performance approached, and there arose some little... I don't need to, actually. I was putting the water bottle lid on, but I need a drink. The day of the performance approached, and there arose some little trouble about William's costume. If the wearing of the dining room hearthrug had been forbidden by authority, it would have at once become the dearest wish of William's heart, and a thing to be accomplished at all costs. But because authority decreed that it should be William's official costume, just shaking this cloth to cool it down, because authority had decreed that it should be William's official costume as the wolf, William at once began to find insuperable difficulties. "It's a dirty old thing, all dust and bits of black hair come off it on me. I don't think it looks like a wolf. Well, if I've got to be a wolf, folks might just as well know what I am. This looks like as if it came off a black sheep or something. You don't want folks to think I'm a sheep instead of a wolf, do you? You don't want me to be made to look ridiculous before all these folks, do you?" He was slightly mollified by their promise to hire a wolf's head for him. He practised wolf's howlings, though these had no part in Mrs. de Vere Carter's play, at night in his room, till he drove his family almost beyond the bounds of sanity. Mrs. de Vere Carter had hired the village hall for the performance, and the proceeds were to go to a local charity. On the night of the play, the hall was packed, and Mrs. de Vere Carter was in a flutter of excitement and importance. "Yes, the dear children are splendid, and and they look beautiful. We've all worked so hard. Yes, entirely my own composition. I only hope that William Brown won't murder my poetry as he does at rehearsals." The curtain went up. The scene was a wood, as was evident from a few small branches of trees placed here and there at intervals on the stage. Joan, in a white dress and red cloak, entered and began to speak, quickly and breathlessly, stressing every word with impartial regularity. "A little maid am I, Red Riding Hood. My journey lies along this dark thick wood. Within my basket is a little jar of jam, a present for my grandmamma." Then Cuthbert entered, a prince in white satin, with a blue sash. There was a rapt murmur of admiration in the audience as he made his appearance. William waited impatiently and uneasily behind the scenes. His wolf's head was very hot. One of the eye holes was beyond his range of vision. Through the other he had a somewhat prescribed view of what went on around him. He had been pinned tightly into the dining room hearthrug, his arms pinioned down by his sides. Can you shut mine, please? Sorry, it's raining and I have some skylights open. He was distinctly uncomfortable. I'm just going to go and shut my skylights. I'll be back in a minute. Just wait. I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to go and shut the skylights. It's raining. My office right under the roof, and we have some roof windows. And because it's been so hot, I had them open. And we don't really want the rain coming in onto everything that's underneath in the office. Sorry, just getting my chair so the wheels are pointing the right way so that they won't drift backwards. Ha! Right, carrying on. Then Cuthbert entered, a prince in white satin with a blue sash. Oh, no, we had all that bit. William is wearing his wolf's head. He can't see out of one eye, and the other one, because his head is inside this, like a mask. It's actually a thing that fits over his head. He can see out of one eye, but only just. So it's like fairly restricted. And he's been basically stitched into the living room hearthrug to be his costume, so his arms are stuck beside him. He had been pinned tightly into the dining room hearthrug, his arms pinioned down by his side. He was distinctly uncomfortable. At last his cue came. Red Riding Hood and the prince parted after a short conversation in which their acquaintance made rapid strides, and at the end of which the prince said casually as he turned to go, "So sweet a maid have I never seen. Ere long I hope to make her my wife and queen." I don't remember a prince in Red Riding Hood, do you? Red Riding Hood gazed after him, remarking, all in the same breath and tone, "How kind he is, how gentle and how good. But see what evil beast comes through the wood." Here William entered, amid wild applause. On the stage he found that his one eye hole gave him an excellent view of the audience. His mother and father were in the second row. Turning his head round slowly, he discovered his sister Ethel sitting with a friend near the back. "William," hissed the prompter, "go on. A wolf am I?" But William was engrossed in the audience. There was Mrs. Clive about the middle of the room. "A wolf am I. Go on, William." William had now found the cook and the housemaid in the last row of all, and was turning his eye-hole round in search of fresh discoveries. The prompter grew desperate. A wolf am I, a wolf on mischief bent. Say it, William. William turned his wolf's head towards the wings. Well, I was going to say it, he said irritably. If you'd left me alone. The audience tittered. Well, say it, said the voice of the invisible prompter. Well, I'm going to, said William. I'm not going to say that again what you said, because they all heard it. I'll go on from there. The audience rocked in wild delight. Behind the scenes, Mrs. de Vere Carter wrung her hands and sniffed strong-smelling salts. That boy, she moaned. Then William, sinking his voice from the indignant clearness with which it had addressed the prompter to a muffled inaudibility, continued, "To eat this little maid is my intent." But there leapt on the stage again the radiant white and blue figure of the prince, brandishing his wooden sword. "Avaunt, be gone, you wicked wolf, away! This gentle maid shall never be your prey." At this point, William should have slunk away, but the vision revealed by his one available eye-hole of the prince standing in a threatening attitude with one arm round Joan filled him with a sudden and unaccountable annoyance. He advanced slowly and pugnaciously towards the prince, and the prince, who had never before acted with William in his head, which was hired for one evening only, they'd practiced without the head, fled from the stage with a wild yell of fear. The curtain was lowered hastily. There was consternation behind the scenes, William glaring from out his eye-hole and refusing to remove his head, defended himself in his best manner. "Well, I didn't tell him to run away, did I? I didn't mean him to run away. I only looked at him. Well, I was going to slink in a minute. I only wanted to look at him. I was going to slink." "Oh, never mind. Get on with the play," moaned Mrs. de Vere Carter. "But you've quite destroyed the atmosphere, William. You've spoilt the beautiful story. But hurry up. It's time for the grandmother's cottage scene now." Not a word of William's speeches was audible in the next scene, but his attack on and consumption of the aged grandmother was one of the most realistic parts of the play, especially considering the fact that his arms were imprisoned. "Not so roughly, William," said the prompter in a sibilant whisper. "Don't make so much noise. They can't hear a word anyone's saying." At last, William was clothed in the nightgown and nightcap and lying in the bed, ready for Little Red Riding Hood's entrance. The combined effect of the rug and the head and the thought of Cuthbert made him hotter and crosser than he had ever remembered having felt before. He was conscious of a wild and unreasoning indignation against the world in general. Then Joan entered and began to pipe monotonously, "Dear grandmamma, I've come with all quickness to comfort you and soothe your bed of sickness. Here are some little dainties I have brought to show you how we cherish you in our thought." Here William rose wearily from the bed and made an unconvincing spring in her direction. But onto the stage leapt Cuthbert at once more, the vision of blue and white with golden curls shining and sword again drawn. "Ha! Evil beast!" It was too much for William. The heat and discomfort of his attire, the sight of the hated Cuthbert already about to embrace his Joan, goaded him to temporary madness. With a furious gesture... Sorry, picture time. No, I haven't got the right picture yet. And then we'll get to the furious gesture. Sorry, it's a little bit smudged, but that's the way it was. With a furious gesture, he burst the pins which attached the dining room hearthrug to his person and freed his arms. He tore off the white nightgown. He sprang at the petrified Cuthbert, a small wild figure in a jersey suit and a wolf's head. Mrs. de Vere Carter had filled Red Riding Hood's basket with packages of simple groceries, which included, among other things, a paper bag of flour and a jar of jam. William seized these wildly and hurled handfuls of flour at the prostrate, screaming Cuthbert. The stage was suddenly pandemonium. I'm not surprised. The other small actors promptly joined the battle. The prompter was too panic-stricken to lower the curtain. The air was white with clouds of flour. The victim scrambled to his feet and fled, a ghost-like figure, round the table. "Take him off me," he yelled. "Take him off me! Take William off me!" His wailing was deafening. The next second he was on the floor with William on top of him. William now varied the proceedings by emptying the jar of jam onto Cuthbert's face and hair. They were separated at last by the prompter and stage manager, while the audience rose and cheered hysterically. But louder than the cheering rose the sound of Cuthbert's lamentation. "He's a nasty rough boy. He pushed me down. He messed my nice clothes. Boo-hoo." Mrs. de Vere Carter was inarticulate. That meant she couldn't speak. That boy was all she could say. William was hurried away by his family before she could regain speech. "You've disgraced us publicly," said Mrs. Brown plaintively. "I thought you must have gone mad. People will never forget it. I might have known." When pressed for an explanation, William would only say, "Well, I felt hot. I felt awful hot, and I didn't like Cuthbert." He appeared to think this was sufficient explanation, though he was fully prepared for the want of sympathy displayed by his family. "Well," he said firmly, "I'd just like to see you do it. I'd just like to see you be in the head and that old rug and have to say stupid things and see folks you don't like, and I bet you'd do something." But he felt that public feeling was against him and relapsed sadly into silence. From the darkness in front of them came the sound of Cuthbert's wailing as Mrs. Clive led her 2 charges home. "Poor little Cuthbert," said Mrs. Brown. "If I were Joan, I don't think I'd ever speak to you again." "Ha!" ejaculated William scornfully. But at William's gate a small figure slipped out from the darkness, and 2 little arms crept round William's neck. "Oh, William," she whispered, "he's going tomorrow, and I am glad. Isn't he a softy? Oh, William, I do love you. You do such sighting things." Joan seems to be really well suited as a friend for William, isn't she? And that's the end of chapter 6. We'll have chapter 7 very shortly. Time to have a drink of water. I forget to put the water bottle down quietly, and it glugs at the microphone. I'm eating a nectarine. They're like peaches, but not fuzzy. And they're some of my favourite fruit. I love this time of year because of the fact that we get stone fruit. Peaches, nectarines, plums, cherries from other parts of the country because we don't grow them around here. It's a bit warm for them. All that sort of stuff. I really like that sort of fruit. And it's just one of those things. You have to wait for the right time of year to really be able to have them and enjoy them properly. Because if they're grown in the right season for where you are and you're eating them in the right season for when they're available, when they're ripe, they're much nicer than if they're ones that have been in storage for a long time. Sorry. I'm just getting some bits and pieces out of my teeth before I start reading again and checking one little piece of information. And then we shall carry on. I will just check to see if there's another picture that I ought to put up first. Bother. Didn't get the right sized one. Oh well. We'll see what it looks like in a minute. Okay, we're reading More William by Richmal Crompton, and we are reading chapter 7, which is called The Ghost. Ooh, this sounds interesting. The ghost. This is probably the last chapter for today, sorry. William lay on the floor of the barn, engrossed in a book. This was a rare thing for William. His bottle of lemonade lay untouched by his side, and he even forgot the half-eaten apple which reposed in his hand. His jaws were arrested midway in the act of munching. Our hero, he read, was awakened about midnight by the sound of the rattling chains. Raising himself on his arm, he gazed into the darkness. About a foot from his bed he could discern a tall, white, faintly gleaming figure and a ghostly arm which beckoned him. William's hair stood on end. "Crumbs!" he ejaculated. Nothing perturbed, he continued to read, our hero rose and followed the spectre through the long winding passages of the old castle. Whenever he hesitated, a white, luminous arm, hung around with ghostly chains, beckoned him on. "Gosh!" murmured William, enthralled. "I'd have been scared." At the panel in the wall the ghost stopped, and silently the panel slid aside, revealing a flight of stone steps. Down this went the apparition, followed by our intrepid hero. I'm not reading it the way William would be reading it if he's reading it out loud. I think this is how he's hearing it. There was a small stone chamber at the bottom, and into this the rays of moonlight poured, revealing a skeleton in a sitting attitude beside a chest of golden sovereigns. The gold gleamed in the moonlight. Sovereigns were a coin of very high value. "Golly!" gasped William, red with excitement. "William!" The cry came from somewhere in the sunny garden outside. William frowned sternly, took another bite of the apple, and continued to read. Our hero gave a cry of astonishment. "Yeah, I'd have done that all right," agreed William. "William!" "Oh, shut up!" called William irritably, thereby revealing his hiding place. His grown-up sister Ethel appeared in the doorway. "Mother wants you," she announced. "Well, I can't come. I'm busy," said William coldly, taking a draught of lemonade and returning to his book. "Cousin Mildred's come," continued his sister. William raised his freckled face from the book. We've got a picture. There you go. There's William lying on the floor in the shed, reading. There's his bottle of lemonade. He's got his apple in his hand. There's the book. And he's looking over his shoulder at his sister Ethel, who's standing in the doorway, having made an announcement that Cousin Mildred has come. William raised his freckled face from the book. "Well, I can't help that, can I?" he said, with the air of one arguing patiently with a lunatic. Ethel shrugged her shoulders and departed. "He's reading some old book in the barn," he heard her announce, "and he says—" Here he foresaw complications and hastily followed her. "Well, I'm coming, aren't I?" he said, "as fast as I can." Cousin Mildred was sitting on the lawn. She was elderly and very thin and very tall. I'm guessing it's mother's cousin, not the children's. And she wore a curious, long, shapeless garment of green silk with a golden girdle. A girdle's a type of belt. "Dear child," she murmured, taking the grimy hand that William held out to her in dignified silence. He was cheered by the sight of tea and hot cakes. Cousin Mildred ate little but talked much. "I'm living in hopes of a psychic revelation, dear," she said to William's mother. "In hopes. I've heard of wonderful experiences, but so far none, alas, have befallen me. Automatic writing I have tried, but any communication the spirits may have sent me that way remains illegible, quite illegible." She sighed. William eyed her with scorn while he consumed reckless quantities of hot cakes. They're like muffins, kind of. That's the nearest, where you eat them warm. "I would love to have a psychic revelation," she sighed again. "Yes, dear," murmured Mrs. Brown, mystified. "William, you've had enough?" "Enough?" said William in surprise. "Why, I've only had—" He decided hastily against exact statistics and in favour of vague generalities. He realised he probably had enough. And if he said the number, Mother would be definitely going to say you've had enough. I've only had hardly any, he said aggrievedly. You've had enough anyway, said Mrs. Brown firmly. The martyr rose, pale but proud. Well, can I go then if I can't have any more tea? There's plenty of bread and butter. I don't want bread and butter, he said scornfully. Dear child, murmured Cousin Mildred vaguely as he departed. He returned to the story and lemonade and apple and stretched himself happily at full length in the shady barn. But the ghostly visitant seemed to be fading away, and with a soft sigh was gone. Our hero, with a start of surprise, realised that he was alone with the gold and the skeleton. For the first time he experienced a thrill of cold fear and slowly retreated up the stairs before the hollow and, as it seemed, vindictive stare of the grinning skeleton. I wonder what he was grinning at, said William. But to his horror the door was shut. The panel had slid back. He had no means of opening it. He was imprisoned on a remote part of the castle where even the servants came but rarely, and at intervals of weeks. Would his fate be that of the man whose bones gleamed white in the moonlight? Sorry. Crumbs, said William earnestly. Then a shadow fell upon the floor of the barn, and Cousin Mildred's voice greeted him. So you're here, dear. I'm just exploring your garden and thinking. I like to be alone. I see that you are the same, dear child. I'm reading, said William with icy dignity. Dear boy, won't you come and show me the garden and your favourite nooks and corners? William looked at her thin, vague, amiable face and shut his book with a resigned sigh. All right, he said laconically. He conducted her in patient silence round the kitchen garden and the shrubbery. She looked sadly at the house with its red brick, uncompromisingly modern appearance. William, I wish your house was old, she said sadly. William resented any aspersions on his house from outsiders. Personally, he considered newness in a house an attraction. But if anyone wished for age, then old his house should be. Old, he ejaculated. I guess it's old enough. Oh, is it? She said, delighted. Restored recently, I suppose. Agreed William, nodding. Oh, I'm so glad. I may have some psychic revelation here, then. Oh, yes, said William judicially. I shouldn't wonder. William, have you ever had one? Oh, yeah, sorry. Well, said William guardedly, I don't know. His mysterious manner threw her into a transport. Of course, not to anyone, but to me. I'm one of the sympathetic. To me you may speak freely, William. William, feeling that his ignorance could no longer be hidden by words, maintained a discreet silence. To me it shall be sacred, William. I will tell no one, not even your parents. I believe that children see clouds of glory and all that, she said vaguely, with your unstained childish vision. I'm 11, put in William indignantly. You see things that to the wise are sealed, some manifestation, some spirit, some ghostly visitation. Oh, said William, suddenly enlightened, you're talking about ghosts. Yes, ghosts, William. Her air of deference flattered him. She evidently expected great things of him, great things she should have. At the best of times with William, imagination was stronger than cold facts. He gave a short laugh. Oh, ghosts, yes, I've seen some of 'em. I guess I have. Her face lit up. Will you tell me some of your experiences, William? She said humbly. Well, said William loftily, you won't go talking about it, will you? Oh, no. Well, I've seen 'em, you know, chains and all, and skeletons, and ghostly arms beckoning, and all that. William was enjoying himself. He walked with a swagger. He almost believed what he said. She gasped. Oh, go on, she said. Tell me all. he went on. He soared aloft on the wings of imagination, his hands in his pockets, his freckled face puckered up in frowning mental effort. He certainly enjoyed himself. "If only some of it could happen to me," breathed his confidante. "Does it come to you at nights, William?" "Yes," nodded William. "Nights mostly." "I shall watch tonight," said Cousin Mildred. "And you say the house is old?" "Awful old," said William reassuringly. "For someone who's 11 years old, yeah, I suppose it is." Her attitude to William was a relief to the rest of the family. Visitors sometimes objected to William. "She seems to have almost taken to William," said his mother, with a note of unflattering incredulity in her voice. William was pleased, yet embarrassed by her attentions. It was a strange experience to him to be accepted by a grown-up as a fellow being. She talked to him with interest and a certain humility. She brought him sweets and seemed pleased that he accepted them. She went for walks with him and evidently took his constrained silence for the silence of depth and wisdom. Beneath his embarrassment, he certainly was pleased and flattered. She seemed to prefer his company to that of Ethel. That was one in the eye for Ethel, but he felt that something was expected from him in return for all this kindness and attention. Something tickling my eyelid. We'll see if that worked. William was a sportsman. He decided to supply it. He took a book of ghost stories from the juvenile library at school and read them in the privacy of his room at night. Many were the thrilling adventures which he had to tell to Cousin Mildred in the morning. Cousin Mildred's bump of credulity was a large one. She supplied him with sweets on a generous scale. She listened to him with awe and wonder. "William, you are one of the elect, the chosen," she said, "one of those whose spirits can break down the barrier between the unseen world and ours with ease." And always she sighed and stroked back her thin locks sadly. "Oh, how I wish that some experience would happen to me." One morning, after the gift of an exceptionally large tin of toffee, William's noblest feelings were aroused. Manfully, he decided that something should happen to her. Cousin Mildred slept in the bedroom above William's. Descent from one window to the other was easy, but ascent was difficult. That night, Cousin Mildred awoke suddenly as the clock struck 12. There was no moon, and only dimly did she discern the white figure that stood in the light of the window. She sat up, quivering with eagerness. Her short, thin little pigtail stuck out horizontally from her head. Her mouth was wide open. Oops, sorry, there's a picture. Her mouth was wide open. There she is, sitting up in bed. That's her hair poking out at the back because she's got it all pulled back. And there's the white figure. I should get a clearer picture than that, sorry. "Oh!" she gasped. The white figure moved a step forward and coughed nervously. Cousin Mildred clasped her hands. "Speak," she said in a tense whisper. "Oh, speak!" Some message, some revelation. William was nonplussed. None of the ghosts he had read of had spoken. They had rattled and groaned and beckoned, but they had not spoken. He tried groaning and emitted a sound faintly reminiscent of a seasick voyager. "Oh, speak," pleaded Cousin Mildred. Evidently speech was a necessary part of this performance. William wondered whether ghosts spoke English, or a language of their own. He inclined to the latter view and nobly took the plunge. "Honk, yonk, ponk," he said firmly. Cousin Mildred gasped in wonder. "Oh, explain," she pleaded ardently. "Explain in our poor human speech some message." William took fright. It was all turning out to be much more complicated than he had expected. He hastily passed through the room and out of the door, closing it noiselessly behind him. As he ran along the passage came the sound of a crash of thunder. Outside in the passage were Cousin Mildred's boots. William's father's boots and William's brother's boots, and into these charged William in his headlong retreat. They slid noisily along the polished wooden surface of the floor, ricocheting into each other as they went. Doors opened suddenly, and William's father collided with William's brother in the dark passage, where they wrestled fiercely before they discovered each other's identity. "I heard that confounded noise and I came out." "So did I." "Well then, who made it?" "Who did?" "If it's that wretched boy up to any tricks again." William's father left the sentence unfinished, but went with determined tread towards his younger son's room. William was discovered carefully spreading a sheet over his bed and smoothing it down. Mr. Brown, roused from his placid slumbers, was a sight to make a brave man quail, but the glance that William turned upon him was guileless and sweet. "Did you make that confounding row kicking boots about the passage?" spluttered the man of wrath. "No, father," said William gently. "I've not been kicking no boots about." "Were you down on the lower landing just now?" said Mr. Brown with compressed fury. William considered this question silently for a few seconds, then spoke up brightly and innocently. "I dunno, father. You see, some folks walk in their sleep, and when they wake up they don't know where they've been. I've heard of a man walking down a fire escape in his sleep, and then he woke up and couldn't think how he'd got to be there where he was. You see, he didn't know he'd walked down all them steps sound asleep, and—" "Be quiet!" thundered his father. "What in the name of— What on earth are you doing making your bed in the middle of the night? Are you insane?" William, perfectly composed, tucked in one end of his sheet. "No, father, I'm not insane. My sheet just fell off me in the night, and I got out to pick it up. I must have been a bit restless, I suppose. Sheets come off easy when folks is restless in bed, and they don't know anything about it till they wake up, just same as sleepwalking. Why, I've heard of folks—" "Be quiet!" At that moment, William's mother arrived, placid as ever, in her dressing gown, carrying a candle. "Look at him," said Mr. Brown, pointing at meek-looking William. "He plays rugger up and down the passage with the boots all night, and then he begins to make his bed. He's mad. He's—" William turned his calm gaze upon him. "I wasn't playing rugger with the boots, father," he said patiently. Rugger is a slang or a nickname term for rugby, kicking balls around. Mrs. Brown laid her hand soothingly upon her husband's arm. "You know, dear," she said gently, "a house is always full of noises at night. Basket chairs creaking." Mr. Brown's face grew purple. "Basket chairs!" he exploded violently, but allowing himself to be led unresisting from the room. William finished his bed-making with his usual frown of concentration, then, lying down, fell at once into the deep sleep of childish innocence. But Cousin Mildred was lying awake, a blissful smile upon her lips. She too was now one of the elect, the chosen. Her rather deaf ears had caught the sound of supernatural thunder as her ghostly visitant departed, and she had beamed with ecstatic joy. "Honk," she murmured dreamily. "Honk, yonk, honk." William felt rather tired the next evening. Cousin Mildred had departed, leaving him a handsome present of a large box of chocolates. William had consumed these with undue haste in view of possible maternal interference. His broken night was telling upon his spirits. He felt distinctly depressed and saw the world through jaundiced eyes. He sat in the shrubbery, his chin in his hand, staring moodily at the adoring mongrel, Jumble. "It's a rotten world," he said gloomily. "I've took a lot of trouble over her, and she goes and makes me feel sick with chocolates." Jumble wagged his tail sympathetically. And that's the end of the chapter and today's reading. There you go. He's inventive. William is very inventive. He's quite the imaginative young lad, but also very practical. in his own way. Anyway, so thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.